Hello everybody, Mannix here. Got a little knife discussion video for you right here, right now. Feel free to subscribe, hit the little bell notification if you don't want to miss any future knife videos, gear videos, gun videos, lighters, etc. And feel free to support me on Patreon. Every penny counts. Thank you so much. Link in the description. Anyway, let's get this started. Pin construction knives. Knives that do not have any pivot screws on them. No screws whatsoever, except perhaps the pocket clip right there, but body screw is actually just a pin, and then we got a pin for the pivot right there, and then there are absolutely no screws anywhere else. They somehow put this together another way. These have been out for a long time now, filming this late 2022. I would say somewhere around the early 2010s, if not the late 2000s, 2009, somewhere around there. These kind of stopped getting used. The trend became screws. They had screw knives before then as well, but they were kind of interchangeable back in the day. This is right before I personally really got into knives. I was still kind of young then, young teenager. So I didn't really know too much about knives back then. I wasn't really into the knife scene at that time. But what I can say is that I do recall seeing these floating around. I would say it was a kind of a composition of 50-50. Some knives had screws, some knives had pins. It was debated. You know, people were kind of floating back and forth. It was kind of like back in the day in the 90s when people were debating cassette tapes versus CDs. Which one's better? And there technically were advantages and disadvantages to both. But eventually CDs took over, and now we don't even have those anymore. That's kind of what the pins make you think of. There are technically some advantages, but they're just not used anymore. For every, I don't know, probably 30, 40, 50 knives that are made out there, maybe one of them has pins, but it's probably even less than that. I can't remember the last new pin construction folding knife I've seen that's been made in probably a decade now, except for the Spyderco Mannix. Not this Mannix right here, but the Spyderco Mannix lightweight with the blue polymer handle, the FRCP handle, whatever they called that. There was a version, the initial version actually was pin construction. That's why I brought out the Mannix here just for comparison. I don't have that version in particular, but just thought I'd use this as a comparison. Yes, that one actually was a pin construction knife, and then later they upgraded to screw construction. Or at least the pivot screw was upgraded to a screw instead of a pin. Very interesting. So is there an advantage to pins? Actually, yes. The advantage is that they will never fall apart on you. They can't possibly unscrew. It's a single piece of metal, pretty much. Pins are not two pieces of metal put together like screws are. As you know, a screw has a female and a male side. Male side screws into the female side. You can get them tight. You can lock them in there. You can Loctite them in there. A couple different things you can do to keep them in place, but ultimately they are two pieces put together, and there's always that chance. Murphy's Law, there's always a chance something could go wrong, something can fall apart, something can loosen on you, etc. With a pin, you don't have that. You don't have to worry about that. It's one and done. It's put in there. You're never going to have an issue with it. Generally, they're a lot less likely to have problems than screws. The disadvantage is, elephant in the room, you cannot adjust them. You can never take them out. You can't take your knife apart. It's permanent. Once the knife is in its place and it's put together, it's manufactured, that's it. This old model Cold Steel Voyager from the early 2000s is never going to be taken apart unless I completely destroyed it. Or unless I was really handy and I knew a lot about knife manufacturing and I could tinker with it myself in my garage. But I don't have the equipment, don't have the know-how yet. May never will. I would like to be a knife maker one day, but we'll see. It's not really on my priority list right now. But the advantage to pins, again, is that they'll never fall apart. You'll generally not have issues with them. The tension will never loosen on you. Technically, I think it does loosen over time, but we're talking probably slower than 10 times in comparison to a screw. I don't know the exact numbers. It kind of depends on some other factors, but short answer is these won't fall apart on you. You generally won't have problems with them. If you do have problems with them, then you're screwed, no pun intended, because there's nothing you can do. It's a pin. I think there's some things you can do to adjust them, like hammer them lightly and stuff, but you got to be really careful. You could just completely break them that way. You just got to be careful. I mean, there's some things you can do to adjust pins, but they're not meant to be adjusted. They're meant to be permanent, one and done. That's it. Can't take this knife apart. You got to get used to whatever its tension is. It's great on this knife, actually. I can flick out this lock back, a notoriously slower locking mechanism, without any wrist movement. And there's a little bit of side to side, but it doesn't need to lock up like a bank vault or anything. It's actually fine. And remember, this knife's old. This knife's at least a dozen years old. Could be 13, 14, 15 years. It's old. Actually, no, you know what? It's the AOS 8 version. That means it was pre-2007, I think. So, you know, it's even older than that. My apologies there. But it's still going strong, still going well. With screws, there's always that inherited issue of it loosening on you. It will loosen on you if you don't Loctite it. Even out of the box, from the manufacturer, they may loosen on you. They will loosen on you most of the time, actually, as you open and close it, even conventionally, even during EDC tasks, normal everyday carry tasks. They'll loosen on you. You got to adjust it. Not really a big deal, but they can fall out on you. They can strip on you as you're trying to screw them or unscrew them. Not just the threading, but the heads. I can't tell you how many heads of even very expensive folders I have ruined just trying to unscrew them or screw them in normally. It's such a pain in the ass. It's maddening. I know a lot of you guys know what I'm talking about. Someone recently commented on that very topic, and that's what inspired me to go ahead and make this video finally, was that very reason. I've had many, many heads. In fact, this knife in particular, I ruined the heads on this just trying to tighten it. Sent it back to Spyderco, got new heads in there. That was really awesome of them. But my point is, it's super inconvenient. You can even break tips on screwdrivers. I've done that. Somehow the head just completely snaps, gets locked in there. They can loosen on you. They can fall out. When you try to put them back in, they can strip. You can have issues with them, but the advantage is it's adjustable with screws. You can adjust the tension to your liking. You can Loctite it to make sure it does not unscrew on you. You can take the knife apart if you want to clean it, if you want to make some adjustments. Let's say you have a liner lock and maybe the liner is a little bit too loose. You can take it apart, bend the liner in place. You can do that with frame locks. You can fix little rattling noises inside of your knives. If there's loose pieces of metal moving around, you can glue those in. There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of advantages to screws over pins, which is why I believe screws overall are superior to pins. And I think that's what most of us believe, and that's why we have officially moved on from the pins and moved on to the screws. Again, somewhere around the early 2010s, I want to say, is when we officially kind of jumped to that. There's very, very, very few knives that use pins anymore. But again, they're not to be laughed at. They do have their advantages. Never got to worry about them, pretty much. So if you have a knife that happens to have perfect tension for you, you're all set if it's got pins. Never got to worry about it. Again, one and done. No worries. But if something does happen internally, something breaks or snaps, you're crap out of luck. But it's less likely for something to break or snap or go wrong in the first place because it is pin construction. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. So overall, I do see screws as an advantage, as an upgrade from pins, but pins still have their place. Never got to worry about them, pretty much. Screws, on the other hand, I can't tell you how many problems I've had with screws. They strip so easily, man. Sucks. I'm trying to just tighten it, trying to loosen it, just boop, ruined that screw, never getting it out again. Let's take a hacksaw to it and ruin the rest of the handle in an attempt to use a flathead screwdriver to unscrew it. It can be a complete nightmare. But again, as long as you're very careful and as long as the screws are heat treated properly and put together properly, then I see them as an advantage over the pins. But again, if not, or user error, or if you're just using just slightly the wrong angle or something, you can completely ruin it. What do you think? Do you miss pins at all? Do you wish they bring pins back on knives? Personally, I like pins, but I don't miss them. I do think screws are an advantage overall. It just sucks ass when you get a bad screw or you ruin your screws. You could argue that's user error. True sometimes, but sometimes not. Sometimes it is the manufacturer's fault, I feel like. But some people argue that screws are not meant for disassembly. They are meant for assembly. The knife manufacturer uses the screws to put the knife together, and they don't intend on you taking it apart ever. You could argue that. It's possible. Of course, the screws are meant to be taken apart for the pocket clip if it's swappable. That's a given. But what do you think? Pins, screws, any advantages, disadvantages I'm missing? Anything you miss about pins? Anything you absolutely do not miss about pins? Do you hate pins? Do you love screws? Do you hate screws? Do you love pins? Let me know. Comment below. Thank you so much for watching.